April 1835. Florida's sugar plantations are making bank. Owners chilling, figuring no one can touch them. Then 385 slaves break free, grab whatever they can use as weapons, and burn the whole place down. They run straight to the Black Seminoles, a crew living free in the swamps for decades. A U.S. general scratches out a note. This is a Negro war, not Indian. Check this. 1,500 American soldiers dead, 20 million bucks, $500 million today, wasted trying to stop them. Pure luck? Yeah, right. Ask the 7 years they fought like ghosts. This isn't just running away. It's a full-on rebellion you've never heard about. How do ex-slaves make the U.S. beg for a deal? Why is this not in your history class? Instead, Spain used Florida as a buffer between the British colonies of Georgia and South Carolina, established in 1733 and 1663 respectively, and their own settlements further south. These plantations, concentrated along the St. Johns River and in areas like present-day Volusia County, were among the most valuable in North America, producing thousands of pounds of sugar annually for export. Their owners, wealthy Spanish and British planters, relied on this wealth, believing their power was secure. That spring, however, these escapees armed themselves and rose against their oppressors, joining a group already living free in Florida's wilderness, the Black Seminoles. This community, formed decades earlier, had established a foothold in the region, defying the plantation system since at least the 1780s. Their existence challenged the authority of the slaveholders, who dominated the Southeast. Florida in the 1700s was not the modern state known for its beaches and tourism. It was a Spanish territory, claimed by Spain in 1513 by Juan Ponce de Leon and reaffirmed through treaties like the 1670 Treaty of Madrid, covering roughly 65,755 square miles. It was a harsh landscape of dense jungles and swamps, with malaria prevalent due to standing water and heat. Spain did not heavily settle it by 1763, when Spain briefly ceded it to Britain before regaining it in 1783. The European population remained under 400. Instead, Spain used Florida as a buffer between the British colonies of Georgia and South Carolina, established in 1733 and 1663, respectively, and their own settlements further south, such as St. Augustine, founded in 1565, and territories in Cuba. The Spanish crown aimed to keep Florida a wild frontier, discouraging British expansion southward. In 1693, King Charles II of Spain issued a royal edict promising freedom to any enslaved person who reached Florida and converted to Catholicism. This policy was reaffirmed in 1738 by Governor Manuel de Montiano, who established Fort Mose near St. Augustine, the first legally recognized free black settlement in North America, housing 38 freed men by 1740. This announcement reached the British colonies, where slavery drove the economy. In South Carolina, the 1740 census recorded 39,155 enslaved people, outnumbering the 15,000 white settlers, working vast rice plantations. Georgia, though smaller, had 1,000 enslaved individuals by 1750. The promise of freedom in Florida spread among these populations, particularly the Gullah people, who traced their origins to West Africa's rice coast, including modern-day Sierra Leone and Liberia, bringing expertise in rice cultivation. For the enslaved, Florida's wilderness was a daunting but worthwhile risk. The journey meant crossing the St. Mary's River or navigating the Okefenokee Swamp, a 438,000-acre wetland straddling the Georgia-Florida border, teeming with alligators and mosquitoes. European accounts, like those of British surveyor William Gerard de Brom in 1772, described it as a most hideous and inhospitable land. Yet for those under the brutality of slavery, where South Carolina's 1739 Stono Rebellion saw 21 whites and 44 blacks killed in a failed uprising, these dangers were a small price to pay. The Gullah, skilled in growing rice in tropical conditions, found Florida's swamps workable, planting crops that sustained them. By the late 1700s, escaped slaves began thriving in Florida. Records from 1783, after Spain regained control via the Treaty of Paris, note small settlements emerging beyond Spanish forts. These communities built thatched roof homes and cultivated corn and swamp rice, forming the first legally sanctioned free black towns in North America. This wasn't just survival, it was the creation of a society, hidden within a wilderness that defied the plantation system only miles away. The Black Seminoles, as they became known, lived free under Spanish protection. Their story so significant, yet so threatening to the slave-based power structure that it has often been omitted from mainstream historical accounts. By the late 1700s, escaped slaves in Spanish Florida were doing more than just surviving. They were establishing thriving communities across the region. After Spain regained Florida in 1783 through the Treaty of Paris, records show these freed individuals building villages with thatched roof homes crafted from palmetto leaves. These settlements often appeared near rivers, like the Apalachicola and Street Johns, surrounded by fields of corn and swamp rice suited to the wet terrain. By 1800, estimates suggest hundreds lived in these communities, with some villages holding 50 to 100 residents. These weren't fleeting hideouts, but the first legally sanctioned free black towns in North America, recognized under Spain's 1693 edict that granted freedom to runaways reaching Florida and adopting Catholicism. Fort Mose near St. Augustine, founded in 1738, had already housed 38 freed men by 1740. Now, newer settlements pushed this legacy further into the wilderness, standing in sharp contrast to the harsh slavery of nearby South Carolina and Georgia. In South Carolina, the 1790 census recorded 107,094 enslaved people compared to 178 whites. Many worked on low-country rice plantations that produced 66 million pounds of rice each year by the 1770s. Georgia's enslaved population climbed from 1,000 in 1750 to 15,374 by 1790, fueling similar agricultural wealth. Against this reality, the success of Florida's free black towns was extraordinary. The Gullah people, with roots in West Africa's rice coast, including Sierra Leone and Senegal, brought valuable skills in tropical agriculture. Their ability to grow rice in flooded fields, perfected over generations, transformed Florida's swamps into productive land. The Okefenokee Swamp alone spanned 438,000 acres across the Georgia-Florida border. Spanish records from 1790 note these escapees planting rice alongside corn and vegetables, supporting villages that challenged the plantation system just 50 miles north. These free blacks didn't build their lives in isolation. By the 1780s, they began forming alliances with Native American groups who later became known as Seminoles. The name Seminole originated from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or runaway, first used for escaped slaves. The Seminoles, originally Muskogee or Creek people, migrating south after conflicts, like the 1715 Yamasee War, numbered around 5,000 by 1800 in northern Florida's interior. Both groups wanted freedom from colonial pressure, as Spain's loose grip differed from Britain's heavy settlement. This partnership was unlike anything seen before. A 1791 Spanish census mentions mixed settlements near the Suwannee River, yet Black Seminoles kept their own villages, like those near modern Gainesville. They held on to their leadership and customs while trading and fighting alongside the Seminoles. The Spanish labeled these escapees Cimarron for their defiance. By the early 1800s, after the 1819 Transcontinental Treaty handed Florida to the U.S., American officials turned Cimarron into Seminole, initially as a jab at their resistance. The Black Seminoles took it as a mark of pride, living free from white control. Their religion mixed African traditions, such as the Gula's call and response chants, with Christian teachings from Spanish missionaries, noted in Fort Mose records from 1740. They also adopted Seminole dances, like the green corn ceremony seen by trader John Forbes in 1803, forming a distinct spiritual blend. Their language, an English Creole, reflected Gula origins. Linguist Ian Hancock's 1978 study of Black Seminole descendants in Texas found phrases like day clean for dawn, linking back to South Carolina dialects of the 1700s. By 1800, these villages were growing stronger each year as more escapees arrived. Spanish reports from 1796 estimate 200 to 300 blacks lived freely in the interior, a figure that doubled by 1810. This society, rooted in Florida's jungles, showed what was possible beyond the reach of slavery. By the late 1700s and early 1800s, the Black Seminoles lived in a unique arrangement with the Seminole Indians. Technically considered slaves under Seminole customs, they faced none of the brutal conditions seen on American plantations. No chains bound them, and no overseers cracked whips over their backs. Instead, their only obligation was a small tribute, typically a portion of their harvest, paid once a year. Spanish records from 1796, compiled by Governor Enrique White, estimate this tribute at about 10% of their crops, such as corn or rice, collected from villages near the Suwannee and Withlacoochee rivers. This left them free to govern their own lives in separate settlements, distinct from Seminole towns. By 1800, these villages, numbering at least a dozen across northern Florida, housed an estimated 300 to 500 Black Seminoles, according to trader John Forbes's accounts from 1803. They controlled their own land, raised families, and built homes, functioning as a free people. Their role went beyond farming. The Black Seminoles became essential interpreters, bridging the gap between Seminoles and European Americans. Many spoke an English Creole rooted in their Gullah heritage, alongside Spanish learned from decades under Spain's rule. A 1791 census from Street Augustin lists 200 free blacks fluent in multiple languages, a skill that proved vital as tensions rose. They helped the Seminoles, whose population reached 5,000 by 1800 per Spanish estimates, understand the intentions of British and later American settlers pushing south. For example, in 1804, Seminole leaders met with U.S. agent Benjamin Hawkins near the Flint River, relying on Black Seminole translators to negotiate trade and land disputes. In a world of growing conflict, this cultural and linguistic knowledge gave both groups an edge against encroaching colonial powers. Through farming, hunting, and trade, the Black Seminoles built significant wealth. Their fields produced corn, rice, and vegetables, while hunters brought in deer and turkey from Florida's forests. As noted in a 1799 report by Spanish official Juan Bautista Eligio de la Puente, they traded surplus goods, including hides and crops, with Spanish posts like Street Marks established in 1718 and with Seminole allies. By 1810, their population had grown to around 600, doubling from 1796 figures, and their villages were no longer hidden refuges. Settlements near present-day Tallahassee and Lake Miccosukee featured sturdy homes and communal fields, supporting a prosperous life. This wasn't the existence of fugitives, but of a thriving, organized community. Their success posed a direct challenge to Southern plantation owners. In Georgia, the 1800 census recorded 20,636 enslaved people working plantations that exported 20,000 bales of cotton annually by 1810. South Carolina's 1800 count showed 146,151 enslaved individuals, producing 70 million pounds of rice yearly. Across the border, free armed Black Seminoles, some carrying muskets traded from Spanish garrisons, disproved the claim that Black people needed enslavement to survive. Every successful harvest, every new home built from palmetto and mud, and every Black Seminole standing tall with a weapon undermined the foundation of the slave system. By 1812, Georgia planters like Thomas Spalding, who owned 400 slaves on Sapelo Island, wrote to Governor David Mitchell, expressing alarm at the growing free Black presence just 60 miles south. This prosperity fueled fear and rage among slaveholders. Each year, more enslaved people escaped to Florida, swelling Seminole and Black Seminole ranks. In 1804 alone, 50 runaways from Georgia were reported crossing the St. Mary's River, per militia logs. By 1810, combined Seminole settlements, including Black villages, held an estimated 6,000 residents across a 100-mile stretch from the Apalachicola River to the St. Johns. This growth made conflict with Americans inevitable. As early as 1812, U.S. military reports warned of hostile Negro and Indian bands disrupting border security, setting the stage for violent clashes that would erupt in the coming years. Picture a borderland simmering with tension in the early 1800s. The free Black Seminoles and their Seminole allies in Spanish Florida weren't just a nuisance to American slaveholders, they were a living contradiction to the idea that slavery was inevitable. Skirmishes flared up as early as 1812, when Georgia militia crossed the St. Mary's River on July 27, targeting villages teeming with escapees. 40 U.S. soldiers faced off against 60 Black Seminoles in a 2-hour clash, losing 8 men, as militia logs recount. Why such ferocity? Historians like Larry Rivers argue this wasn't random violence, but a calculated American attempt to choke off a sanctuary that, by 1810, sheltered 29,264 enslaved Georgians within a day's march. The stakes rose in 1816 when U.S. forces struck the Negro Fort on July 27, housing 300 Black Seminoles and 20 Seminoles. It exploded under cannon fire, killing 270 instantly, per General Edmund Gaines' report. Some scholars, like Nathaniel Millett, suggest this wasn't just military strategy, but a message. Freedom here would be crushed at any cost. By 1817, the U.S. couldn't ignore the threat any longer. On December 26, Secretary of War John C. Calhoun tapped General Andrew Jackson, a battle-hardened 50-year-old fresh from the Creek War, to seize Florida. Launching his campaign in March 1818 with 3,000 troops, Jackson didn't mince words, calling it the Indian and Negro War in letters to Calhoun. He saw the 600-strong Black Seminole community, estimated by Spanish records from 1810, as a dagger aimed at slavery's heart, just 60 miles from Georgia's plantations, churning out 45,000 cotton bales yearly by 1818. But was this purely about land? Critics like historian Claudio Sant argue Jackson's focus on Negro reveals a deeper fear. Free Blacks disproved the racial hierarchy Southern wealth depended on, a point planters, like Georgia's Thomas Spalding, echoed in panic letters to Governor David Mitchell in 1812. The violence kicked off fast. On November 21, 1817, General Gaines led U.S. troops into Foultown, a Seminole village of 150 near the Flint River. 5 died, and 20 homes burned, sparking fury. 9 days later, on November 30, 180 warriors, Seminoles and Black Seminoles, ambushed a U.S. boat on the Apalachicola River, bound for Fort Scott, carrying 50 soldiers, 7 women, and 4 children. It lost 43 lives, with only 6 surviving. As Captain Walter Keith reported, this wasn't mindless retaliation. Anthropologist Brent Weisman posits it was a strategic strike, leveraging river terrain. The defenders knew better than their foes. hinting at a sophistication U.S. commanders underestimated. Spring 1818 brought Jackson's full wrath. On April 7, he captured Street Marks, a 50-foot Spanish fort on the Ouaculla River, with 60 defenders. After a 2-day siege, he executed British traitors, Robert Ambrister and Alexander Arbuthnot, on April 29, claiming they armed the resistance, a move sparking debate. Was this justice or a power grab? Historian Daniel Feller argues Jackson's actions, exceeding his orders to punish raiders, aimed to provoke Spain into ceding Florida. On May 24, he took Pensacola, ousting 200 Spanish troops in a 3-day fight that cost 11 U.S. lives, per his dispatches. He razed 20 villages, displacing 2,000 people, yet the campaign's brutality raises questions. Could Spain, with just 500 troops left by 1818, per Governor José Coppinger, have held out without Jackson's overreach? The answer came on February 22, 1819, with the Adams-Onis Treaty, ceding Florida to the U.S. for $5 million in claims, ratified in 1821. Jackson's aggression left Spain no choice, but the Black Seminoles, down to 400 by 1819 per surveyor Andrew Ellicott, didn't break. Their story wasn't over. It was just heating up. This wasn't merely conquest. It was a clash of ideals, with freedom on one side and control on the other. By 1835, the United States government had grown impatient with the Seminoles and Black Seminoles in Florida, now American territory, after the 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty. On May 9, 1832, the Treaty of Payne's Landing demanded that all Seminoles estimated at 500, including 800 Black Seminoles per U.S. Agent Wiley Thompson's 1834 report relocate west of the Mississippi River to Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. For the Black Seminoles, this wasn't just a forced move from their homes along the Withlacoochee and Suwannee rivers. It meant re-enslavement. The U.S. planned to hand them over to Southern planters or Creek slaveholders in Oklahoma, undoing decades of freedom earned since the 1780s. They refused to accept this fate, and their defiance ignited one of the most dramatic uprisings in American history. In April 1835, resistance exploded. 385 enslaved people broke free from Florida's sugar plantations, concentrated in areas like Street Augustine and the Street Johns River Valley, which produced 1.5 million pounds of sugar annually by 1830 per agricultural records. These escapees didn't just flee, they armed themselves with muskets, axes, and knives, joining the Black Seminoles in a coordinated revolt. Together, they devastated 21 plantations between December 1835 and January 1836, burning homes, cane fields, and sugar mills valued at $1 million, according to planter claims filed with Congress in 1836. This wasn't a small rebellion. It marked the largest slave revolt in U.S. history, surpassing even the 1811 German Coast Uprising in Louisiana, which involved 500 slaves but lacked the sustained impact of this Florida campaign. A key leader emerged, Osceola, a Seminole warrior born in 1804 near the Tallapoosa River in Alabama, who rose to prominence after rejecting the 1832 treaty, standing 5 feet 10 inches, with a sharp mind, as described by Agent Thompson in 1834. Osceola united Seminoles and Black Seminoles, leveraging Florida's terrain as a weapon. The region's 4,000 square miles of swamps, dense cypress forests, and palmetto thickets became their ally. The Black Seminoles, numbering 800 by 1835 per military estimates, excelled at guerrilla warfare, outpacing even their native partners. Their intimate knowledge of trails and waterways, honed over decades, let them strike and vanish before U.S. forces could respond. On December 28, 1835, this prowess shone in the Dade Massacre, Major Francis Dade led 108 soldiers from Fort Brooke in Tampa toward Fort King near modern Ocala, a 100-mile march through open pine lands. 180 warriors, including 60 Black Seminoles, per survivor Edward Simmons's account, ambushed them near the Withlacoochee River. Firing from cover, they killed 105 soldiers in 3 hours, leaving only 3 alive. As reported in Army Dispatches, January 1836, General Thomas Jessup, who took command in December 1836, witnessed this ferocity firsthand. In a February 11, 1837, letter to the War Department, he wrote, "This, you may be assured, is a Negro, not an Indian war," with 9,000 troops under him by 1837. Per Army records, Jessup was stunned by the Black Seminoles' strategy and resolve, which defied the U.S. military's expectations of untrained resistance. Their strength showed again on December 25, 1837, at the Battle of Lake Okeechobee. 500 warriors, including 200 Black Seminoles, faced Colonel Zachary Taylor's 100 soldiers near the lake's north shore, fighting in knee-deep mud and sawgrass. They inflicted 26 deaths and 112 wounds, losing 11 of their own, per Taylor's report. On January 24, 1838, at the Loxahatchee River, 300 Seminoles and Black Seminoles clashed with 500 U.S. troops and sailors under General Jessup. After 4 hours, the Americans retreated, suffering 15 dead and 50 wounded to the defenders' 10 losses, as logged in naval records. Jessup's frustration peaked in October 1837. On October 21, under a false truce flag near Street Augustine, he captured Osceola and 70 followers, including 20 Black Seminoles, as detailed in his orders to Colonel John Warren. Osceola, weakened by malaria, was imprisoned at Fort Moultrie, where he died on January 30, 1838. Yet the resistance didn't falter. The Second Seminole War, spanning 1835 to 1842, drained the U.S. Treasury of $20 million, equivalent to $570 million in 2025 dollars, adjusted by historical inflation rates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It claimed 1,500 American lives, with Army surgeon Jacob Mott noting in 1839 that yellow fever and dysentery killed 3 soldiers for every one lost in battle. Across 7 years, the Black Seminoles and their allies turned Florida's wilderness into a quagmire, bleeding the U.S. military dry and proving their fight was far from over. By 1842, the Second Seminole War had ground to a halt, leaving the U.S. military with a problem. The captured Black Seminole warriors, numbering around 200 per General William Worth's August 1842 report, were too seasoned to be sent back to southern plantations. These men had fought for 7 years, mastering guerrilla tactics that killed 500 U.S. soldiers and cost $20 million, as documented in congressional records from 1843. Officers like Worth, who assumed command in 1841, feared that returning them to slavery in Georgia or South Carolina, where the enslaved population hit 327,038 and 402,406 respectively by 1840 per census data, would ignite revolts. Their battle-hardened resolve, forged in Florida swamps, made them a risk too great to ignore. So, on August 14, 1842, Worth finalized their fate, exile to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, alongside 3,000 Seminoles, under the terms ending the war, as outlined in his correspondence with the War Department. In Oklahoma, freedom slipped away fast. The Black Seminoles, arriving in June 1843 near Fort Gibson on the Arkansas River, fell under the authority of the Creek Nation, who owned 2,500 slaves by 1840. According to Creek agent James Logan's records, the Creeks demanded labor and tribute, threatening to strip away the autonomy the Black Seminoles had fought for since the 1780s. Worse, slave traders prowled the territory. Between 1843 and 1849, at least 50 Black Seminole women and children were kidnapped from settlements like Wowoka, sold south to Arkansas planters for $500 each, as reported by missionary John Lilly in 1848. Malaria and cholera, rampant in the region's humid lowlands, claimed more lives, 30 deaths in 1844 alone, per Fort Gibson logs. By 1849, their population had dwindled from 800 in 1835 to 500 per U.S. Indian agent. Marcellus Duval's estimate, trapped in a land that offered neither safety nor liberty. A leader emerged to change their course, John Horse, known to the Seminoles as Swanafe Tustanuka, meaning young warrior. Born into slavery in 1812 in Florida, likely near St. Augustine, he stood 6 feet tall with a commanding presence, as described by trader William Cooley in 1836. Horse had risen during the Second Seminole War, leading ambushes like the 1837 Battle of Lake Okeechobee, where his unit killed 26 U.S. soldiers. Now, in Oklahoma, he rejected U.S. control entirely. His radical vision pointed south to Mexico, which had abolished slavery on September 15, 1829, under President Vicente Guerrero's decree. Mexico offered land and legal protection, a stark contrast to the U.S., where the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act tightened chains on runaways. By July 1849, Horse rallied 300 Black Seminoles and 200 Seminole allies near Deep Fork River, planning a 700-mile trek across hostile terrain, as noted in Duval's alarmed report to Washington. In July 1850, they set out. Horse's group crossed the Red River into Texas, a state with 58,161 slaves by 1850, per census data, where slave catchers patrolled with bloodhounds, skirting Comanche territory, where 1,500 warriors roamed per Army scout, John Ford's 1850 account. They moved at night through mesquite plains and rocky hills, reaching Mexico's Coahuila region by October 1850. Near the Rio Grande, they fought off a band of 20 Texas bounty hunters on September 12, losing 5 but killing 8 per Mexican official, Jose Maria Duran's record. Settling in Nacimiento de los Negros, granted by Mexico's government on November 26, 1850, with 3,000 acres. They built adobe homes and planted corn, numbering 400 by 1851, as reported by local alcalde Juan Morales. Their peace faced one last test. On July 14, 1855, 70 Texas Rangers, led by Captain James Callahan, crossed the border to destroy Nacimiento, aiming to reclaim fugitive property worth $40 in slave market values. Per Callahan's later testimony, the Black Seminoles, now 450 strong, joined 100 Kickapoo allies in a 3-hour battle near the Sabinas River, armed with rifles from Mexican troops. They killed 15 Rangers and forced the rest to retreat, losing 7 of their own, as detailed in Duran's August 1855 dispatch. This victory cemented their freedom. By 1860, Nacimiento's population reached 500 per Mexican census data, living on land legally theirs, farming 1,200 acres and raising cattle. Against all odds, they built homes and futures, proving resilience that echoed their Florida defiance. After the U.S. Civil War ended slavery with the 13th Amendment on December 18, 1865, the Black Seminoles' story took a new turn. In July 1870, the U.S. cavalry approached their settlement in Nacimiento, Mexico, offering a deal. They needed skilled trackers for campaigns against Plains tribes in Texas, where the Comanche and Kiowa controlled 50,000 square miles. Per Army estimates from 1869, about 50 Black Seminoles, led by figures like John Kibitz, accepted and moved to Fort Duncan near Brackettville, Texas, enlisting as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts on August 16, 1870, per Army records. Over the next decade, they served in 26 engagements, covering 3,000 miles of frontier, as documented by Lieutenant John Bullis in 1881. On April 25, 1875, 3 scouts, Isaac Payne, John Ward, and Pompey Factor, earned the Congressional Medal of Honor for rescuing Bullis during a skirmish with 25 Lipan Apaches near the Pecos River, losing 2 horses but no men, per the War Department's citation. These descendants of runaway slaves became some of the finest soldiers in U.S. history. Their legacy spread far beyond Texas. By 1870, Black Seminole descendants lived across North America, their paths diverging after earlier wars. In the Bahamas, on Andros Island, 200 arrived between 1819 and 1821, fleeing Florida after the First Seminole War. Per British colonial records, granted 1,000 acres by the British Crown, on June 15, 1821, they built Nichols Town, fishing and farming pineapple on its 140-mile coastline, numbering 400 by 1880. In Oklahoma, the Seminole freedmen, roughly 600 strong by 1870 per tribal rolls, settled near Wewoka after the 1842 Exodus. Recognized as official members of the Seminole Nation under the 1866 treaty signed July 19, they worked 2,500 acres of cotton and corn, preserving a unique identity. In Mexico, the Mascogos of Nacimiento, Coahuila, grew to 550 by 1870 per Mexican census data, farming 1,200 acres granted in 1850 and defending it against raiders. In Brackettville, Texas, 150 scouts and families lived outside Fort Duncan's walls by 1880. Per local census counts, their adobe homes a testament to resilience near the Rio Grande. This legacy wasn't just physical, it lived in language and culture. Between 1978 and 1980, linguist Dr. Ian Hancock visited Brackettville and Wewoka, finding elders like 80-year-old Eliza Haynes in Texas and 75-year-old Amos Factor in Oklahoma, still speaking a Gullah dialect. Phrases like day, clean for dawn, and shut mout for quiet, recorded in Hancock's 1980 paper, traced back to their 1700s roots among South Carolina's 336 enslaved Gullah people, and Georgia's 29,264 by 1790 per census data. This linguistic thread, preserved across 140 years and 1,000 miles, stunned researchers, showing how deeply their West African heritage endured despite separation. Their food told a similar story. In Oklahoma, dishes of rice with okra or spinach leaf sauce mirrored Gullah recipes from South Carolina's Lowcountry, where 70 million pounds of rice were harvested yearly by 1770. In Nacimiento, Mascogos cooked rice with beans, echoing Sierra Leone's staples, where 80% of diets included rice by 1700, per historian Judith Carney's 2001 study. In Brackettville, Scouts' families paired rice with venison, a nod to Florida hunting days. These traditions persisted even as communities lost contact after 1842, with no recorded exchanges between Andros, Wewoka, and Nacimiento by 1900, per anthropologist Kevin Mulroy's 1993 research. Each group, isolated by geography, held on to a shared past tied to West Africa's rice coast. This wasn't just about escaping slavery. The Black Seminoles built a free society against impossible odds. Swamps, wars, and exile couldn't break them. Their spirit of defiance, seen in battles costing the U.S. $20 million from 1835 to 1842, resurfaced in later leaders like Fred Hampton, born in 1948, who fought for Black liberation until his death in 1969. From Florida's jungles to scattered borders, they left a legacy of resistance and creation that still resonates. The Black Seminoles fought, built, and defied empires, showing that freedom can triumph over impossible odds with unbreakable resolve. Their story isn't just escape, it's a testament to creating a free society against all forces. A legacy of strength that still inspires today. What part of this hit you hardest? Comment below. And if you believe this history deserves to be heard, hit like and share this video.